a brilliant lunch and you're sitting down and falling asleep because you're full, and you're reading a slide up here that says I'm going to be talking about standards, and you're preparing for a little nap while you gather up some interesting questions maybe to ask the panel a little bit later on. Maybe we'll have, I was going to do this a bit later on, but we might do it now just to kind of get you all in the mood. I'm preparing for you all to join the IETF. I know this has been a life goal for all of you. What I want you to do is to hum for me. Now, not in a tuneful kind of way. I'm just going to ask you a question, and if you agree with my question, I want you to hum. Was lunch good? All right. The bushfires that are taking place in New South Wales, are they good? Yeah, all right, good. Yep, I think we've got consensus here. Lunch is much better than bushfires. Great. Is Melbourne better than Sydney? All right, great. Is Sydney better than Melbourne? Oh no, you know, I'm up here and I've got the microphone, and I say that Melbourne's better than Sydney. All right, so I am Nicola. Why am I even here? I'm a has-been. I have been a programmer, I have been working in QA, I have been a project manager, I have been a business analyst, I've been a tech writer, and now I'm chief of staff at Fastmail. And that's a bit of a funny title. You know, it's not a CTO, it's not a CEO, it's not a COO. What does a chief of staff do? I look after complicated technical projects that often have got like a legal or a risk component, or they're of significant value to the business that they need a permanent sort of exec stakeholder to make sure that they don't go off the rails and everybody talks nicely to one another. So Fastmail, we're an email company. We believe in the value of human-to-human email. Email is all about communications. Communications is all around people, and that's what we do. And I'm here to tell you a little bit of story about a journey we went on. We made a new standard, yay! Thank you. I'd like to claim credit for it. I didn't have much to do with it, actually. I'm just up here to be public and be enthusiastic about it. So, you know, our new standard is called JMAP. It's a little bit like IMAP, but one more. JMAP's pretty awesome, but I'm not here to talk to you about JMAP. I'm here to talk to you about the process of how you go about turning something into a standard. And hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about how standards are made, and you might be inspired to think about what kind of technology you've got going on in your company that maybe is worth sharing with the world in this kind of fashion, or maybe you'll just back away in horror and think that we're a bit crazy. Because what were we thinking? Making a new standard, that's hard. It's time consuming, it takes a lot of money. It's really stressful. If you think about The Lion King, you know, when the little baby lion is born and he's really cute and they hold him up over the top of an enormous drop over the rock, and, you know, the animals of the jungle are sitting there looking up at him, and, you know, mum and dad lion are like, please don't tear my baby to shreds, please don't drop him off the rock, please, you know, just worship him and say he's great. That's a little bit like building a standard. You take this great idea and you take it to the world and you hope it's not torn to shreds. All right, so let's go on a bit of a tour about standards, and I'll talk a little bit about why it is tough and hard and time consuming, and we'll get to the end and I'll talk about whether we thought it was worth it. I'm going to be talking about this. Caution, there are many TLAs ahead, more acronyms than you can fit in the internet. All right, so what even is a standard? Maybe your idea of a standard is not my idea of a standard. What even is a standard? Standards are things that mean we've got global interoperability. We're talking about communications that underpin how the very internet holds itself together. Hopefully it's predictable and reliable. At least that's our goal. Now, some of these standards over time have not been very precisely specified, and that means that you get incompatibilities taking place. Some of them fall by the wayside. Bye, Gopher. Some of them are supplanted. IRC these days is, you know, you'll often see it turned into Slack. Some of them are a bit peculiar. Did you know that there is a standard for ethics? There is a pigeon protocol. Some of the standards are a bit weird. Some of them have been built and then what did you do with them anyway? And then finally, you've got IMAP. That was about 30 years ago. And hey, JMAP standards. By the way, we've got 2 of them. So hopefully you all heard of open source. And I was thinking about standards as kind of when you open source an idea and you want to codify it so everybody has repeatable outcomes and you want to share it with the world. And that to me is why you go about building a standard, because you want everybody to share that idea and think about it in the same way you do. Man, the internet, there's so many standards in the internet. Why did it need one more? Don't we have enough already? Can you imagine the internet without any standards? I mean, it's easy enough to think about it without GOTO. But it would be anarchy. It would be cats and dogs living together. DNS wouldn't work. Wait a minute. It sort of doesn't, but then it does. And, TCP/IP wouldn't work. Oh, wait a minute. It sort of does. But we've got a lot of standards. Most of them are useful. Where do they come from? You probably take for granted TCP/IP. Who thought it up? They don't come forth fully formed like Athena springing out of Zeus's head. Single artist doesn't go along and say, I have created this perfect thing, now go forth and make it beautiful. And by the way, internet is always improved with cats. We here try to do things with cats, normally 5 of them in a blue cable. We've gone wireless now, even cats are obsolete. Pink Floyd, no, they can't help with produce standards, nor can a Violet crumble machine. No talk is complete of mine unless it involves chocolate. Standards come from volunteers, people like you and me in this very room, who can sit there and see the possibilities. They are sitting there and attempting to innovate on behalf of the world. Now, when I was talking about standards earlier, a whole bunch of things flashed by on the screen, and they had numbers attached. All of these RFCs. An RFC is a particular artefact out of the IETF. Not all of these RFCs go on to become standards in the way we think about them. So the pigeon protocol and the April Fool's Day joke and the ethics thing, that's not something that you're going to build your technology on. So not all RFCs become standards, and not all standards are RFCs. There are plenty of heaps of other standards bodies out there in the wild doing their thing. I'm just going to be talking about the IETF today because that's what our personal experience is in. I imagine that the process in other standards bodies has got sort of similar characteristics, but I'll just be talking about IETF. So why did we particularly choose to publish JMAP through the IETF? There are a bunch of other options that would have been open to us. We could have self-published, and that would have been cheaper, faster, could have gotten out there really quickly. But when you're building email, my server has to talk to your server, and there's 6,000 email clients in there. The only way we were going to make this standard take off is if it had got widespread adoption, and I can guarantee you one thing to not generate widespread adoption is publishing your own little thing on the internet. So we decided we weren't going to self-publish. We could have gone through Oasis. They also have got some email things in there, but that's mostly about data formats, and JMAP is a protocol. So we came to the IETF. Now, another reason we picked the IETF is that they are fully transparent right from the very start all the way through the finish. So anyone can join in at any time. You can see the state of the discussion. You can see the state of the papers at any time. And that was something that we at Fastmail felt aligned with our values. So if you were going to go and launch a new standard, you can find a standards body that works with what you're trying to achieve. Now, the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, I did warn you about the TLAs, their goal is to make the internet better from a technical standpoint. This is distinctly different from being technically better, in the sense of technically correct. They don't concern themselves with policy. They don't concern themselves with business. And there's no formal membership. You can just join the mailing list and bam, you're part of the IETF. Thank goodness I taught you how to hum. It's a bunch of volunteers. There's sort of no structured meetings other than 3 conferences per year that are around the world. Oh, bless you. And everything else is done on mailing lists. And all the volunteers, usually they're sponsored by their employer to say, we are happy and we will pay for your time to go and be involved with this thing because we, the employer, value what the IETF gets up to. So how does an organisation staffed with volunteers around the world even function? And I know that there's been conversations in the room today about team sizes and where does this CTO fit and how do you even distribute that work and what does a roadmap look like? So the IETF has got a bunch of areas and these are loosely formed around sort of spheres of responsibility. And inside these areas, they've got a number of working groups that are working on projects within that area. JMAP has a working group and we were within the applications and real-time area. At any one given moment in time, there is about 100 working groups in the IETF active. So each working group has got a chair, or more than one, and an author, or more than one, and sometimes they're the same people, and a number of other participants. Each area has one or more area directors that oversee all the working groups and making sure they're playing well with others and that they're coming to good conclusions. And the area directors across all of the areas form the IESG, the Internet Engineering Steering Group. And they are involved in review processes. And the working groups live and die as required. Sometimes they discover that they had a bad idea after all, or people who were being involved and pushing it forwards have gone on to do other things, or maybe the work had a good outcome, they achieved the thing they've done, and now they can close up shop and go home. But that's still a lot of people in a lot of areas and they're distributed across multiple time zones and they're not paid. So how does it even work? How do you get on the internet people to agree? The IETF focuses on rough consensus and running code. So they don't say everybody must agree and you must continue debating until final agreement is met by everybody. They say we've got to get people to mostly agree. And the definition of this is a little bit loose, but they do have lots of training for their working group chairs on how to achieve it. And it's not so much, does anyone have any objections? Because if you ask someone, what are your objections to this thing? They're immediately going to think of all the reasons why it's terrible. It's all about, can anyone not live with this in its current shape? They also don't have voting. Like, show of hands, who's into this and who's not into this. Because when you don't have a formal membership system, how do you decide who is allowed to vote? So that's where the humming comes into it. When you get people together in a room and you're asking them, hi, we've got this paper, do we think it's sufficiently good enough to actually be turned into a proper RFC and potentially be published? They sit there and say, not does anyone disagree or agree, but who's happy for this to go forward, who's not happy for this to go forward, and humming is reasonably anonymous. And the working group chair has the final say to say, have we got rough consensus within the group? Now they might say, I have heard a few no hums. Does anybody who hummed no want to talk about their objections? Surface it further, or have you decided that it's not strong enough that you're actually happy to continue? So in that way, they're able to move forward even though they're not requiring everything to be perfect at all times. Okay, so there's the IETF and it's full of lots of people and they've got a working group and the working group goes ahead and how do you build an RFC? And it's a bit like any other project team, but because you're talking about a standard that's going to live for a long time and affect the world, it needs to undergo a certain process. So first of all, someone has an idea, like how do you even form a working group? In JMAP's case, we sat there and we had an idea and we took it to the area director and we said, hi, we've got this thing, we think it's going to be great, will you adopt it? And they said, yes, you seem to have a number of people, I've got some people who I think will be interested in it, we'll make a working group and we'll set off and do the thing. People also get together at conferences at the BOFs and they'll have a bit of a chat about building a new mousetrap and they'll say, yeah, we're going to take it to the mousetrap director and we're going to take off and build a new mousetrap. That's great. So someone has an idea, a working group is formed, they define their charter, which is their definition of done. We are going to build this thing and it's a mousetrap of this shape. They get together, the authors write up their document, they debate until there's rough consensus. Finally, when they've finished arguing, they give themselves a last call. Because when there's no formal membership and not everybody can get to an IETF conference, you need to give people in other time zones a chance to respond and say, yes, this is cool, or No, didn't you know that mice are not the size of hippopotamuses? The thing you've built is ridiculous. So they do their last call. When that's completed, then they talk to the IESG and say, we wish to publish this as a standard. And the IESG, that's where all of the area directors of all of the areas get together. They don't have to agree, but they need to not object. And in this way, you get a second set of eyes who are totally fresh, who haven't been involved with it, who understand lots of the interactions, because they'll be overseeing all of the working groups in all of their different areas. And they get together and go yes or no. Once they don't object, it goes to IANA. And they have got a registry of special magical numbers and code points. And they sit there and say, yes, good, all the code points that you are using, nobody else is using, that's great. And that has to go to the RFC editors. RFCs, if you've ever read them, are guaranteed to put you to sleep. And that's because they're really structured language. They're trying to remove any ambiguity to make sure that, your thing is going to be implemented the way you intended and consistently around the world. So the RFC editors do their thing. And then because it's passed through so many hands, it's handed back to the author and the working group chair to say, is this actually what you thought you were building? A bit like that tree swing parable. And they go, yes, it's all great, thanks, good. And then we publish it and everybody has cake. You can imagine this process might take a little bit of time because at any given moment it drops back when there are objections raised. The first RFC was written in 1969. Just last week, this week when I was writing this talk, they were up to 8,776. An RFC for something I didn't even know what it was. But that works out to be 173 RFCs per year on average. And you imagine that they've probably picked up pace in the beginning compared to now. That's a big output for people who aren't even paid, for people who are on the internet, who are going to argue with one another because they've got no reason not to argue. I mean, their goal is great. Build the best thing you can possibly build. Now, of those RFCs, of those 8,500 or so, not all of them are standards. So RFCs can have a number of statuses. Some of them are just plain obsolete. We don't use this anymore. It's been turned into this new thing. Some are historic. This technology existed at this time, in point in time in space, and nobody uses it anymore. They've got informational ones. There's an April Fool's Day joke, the pigeon protocol for transmitting messages via pigeons. DNS, sometimes things are informational because we've discovered an evolving standard in the wild and someone's written down how it works so that future archaeologists can look back and laugh at us. Some of them are experimental. So you've got an idea, you think you want to turn it into a standard, but you're not really sure, but you want to share its state with other people who may be interested in what's going on, and maybe you'll get promoted to a standard, or maybe you'll shoot it in the head. And then you've got the standards track, and most things are proposed standards, and a few things are formal internet standards. 173 a year. Normal projects are hard enough. And a thing that everybody in this room will know is that getting a project completed in your team, much less on time, with the right kind of quality, with the feature set that you thought you were going to build in the first place, that's hard enough. And that's when you've got paid employees who are often co-located or given, strong communication tools and process. You've got a good carrot and stick kind of mechanism. They're all pulling towards the same vision. Getting that out the door is hard enough. Now let's make it harder. You've got volunteers who've got additional full-time lives. They've got different visions. If you talk to anybody about how authentication should work on the internet, they'll argue. They've got language barriers. You've got people who aren't local. They're dealing with other things. Often people are experts. You don't go and volunteer into an IETF working group if you know nothing about that area, as a general rule. And they all firmly believe that their job is critical review. Would you put your idea in front of this group of people? So it's a bloody marvel that the internet works at all. It also goes to explain some reasons why it's a bit weird and why it's resilient. It's been built by people who've got really good ideas, people who don't belong to a particular company or any one government, people who are dedicated to building a better technical future. But it also goes some way to explaining why things are really slow to change. You think about IPv6 adoption. we know we've got to do it. Have you done it yet? Probably not. Now, just the process of coming up with a new standard takes a long time. It took us 3 years from the moment we approached the area director to the time we got published. And that's just writing the standard. Then you've actually got to go ahead and get everybody to implement it. You think about how long the standard for IPv6 has been around, and it's been forever. Anyone who's built things for mobile devices will know that getting people to upgrade their hardware, much less their operating system, is quite the trial, and you're having to, support backward compatible things. The internet is full of dark magic, forgotten servers that are running software that nobody's got the source code for anymore. So into this arena of horror and disaster step our mighty heroes. Not the cat. Cat doesn't work at Fastmail, much to my sadness. So Neil is actually our UI architect, and he's the one who was the authoring person for JMAP. And Bron is, who's on the right there, he's our CEO. He likes to hack on Cyrus, and he's the JMAP working group chair. Why did we do this to ourselves? What were we thinking? We were thinking we had a really great idea, and we were thinking that the only way that we could compete against big technology companies, the likes of Google and Microsoft, the only way we could get them to adopt our standard from this little small company in Australia is if we made it a global standard. If we got enough bunnies to pile on the giant, that eventually the giant would fall and bow to our wishes, and we would achieve global domination through JMAP. So, we don't believe in vendor lock-in. We believe people's email should belong to them. And we want to produce technologies that make them able to do that. And standards for us were a way that we could sit there and take on, companies that are thousands of times larger than us and have a hope of succeeding. And the only way we could do this was by building something so unequivocally great that even if the business said, why should we invest time in doing this, that at least the technology arm would go, oh my God, have you seen what JMAP can do? It is so cool. I've seen this standard, and these people are working on it, and it's open source, and I've got a library, and I'm going to go and hack on it. And, it just kind of happens by osmosis because it's super great. We wanted to improve the world. Maybe that's a little naive. But wait, like most projects, we're only through the first 90%. And like most projects, you've got at least 3 batches of 90% before it's actually done. We've got a standard. How do you actually get it adopted? Now I'm going to talk about trains. So in Australia, we have a number of different sizes of rail tracks. They're called gauges, rail gauges. Like New South Wales has got one, Victoria's got one. But it's worse than that. Within any given state, we've actually got a number of different rail gauges depending on the kinds of trains and where we bought the trains and what kind of tracks those trains required. And at some point, we sat there and went, oh, shit, we can actually get from Melbourne to Sydney now, but we have to make people change their train at the border. Oh. Or if you're moving freight, can you imagine having to move all that freight from one set of train to another just because you want to ship it interstate? Geez, that sucks. We have been attempting to solve this problem for a long time. You can see that in any one given year, hundreds of devices were proposed in order to solve this problem. It took us 150 years before even the capital cities only were connected with one gauge so that you could get from one capital city to another on a single train. We've still got plenty of different gauges out there. Obviously, adoption is hard, and when you've got physical infrastructure, it's even harder. But it goes to show that even when the goal is very clear, how you get there can take a really long time. So where have we got to with JMAP? Our standard was published in middle of this year. We do a lot of work with the Cyrus open source mail server. So obviously, we've made sure that that supports JMAP. And Apache James have put a layer over the top of theirs to support JMAP. There's a bunch of products that, as a result, are now JMAP compliant. Obviously, Fastmail's products are there. @Mail have got a Go proxy over the top of Dovecot. And Linagora are using Apache James, so they are JMAP compatible. Yay! But it's a long way still from getting it into every client and every desktop, so we've got a long way to go. That's not the only thing we want to do, because we've got JMAP and we've got JMAP mail, but anybody who's using email these days also expects that your contacts go with it, so that you know who you're emailing and who's emailing you. And calendars seem to come with it. Personal information management tools aren't really a thing anymore, except that they sort of are, because that's what's in our pocket all the time, our phones that we're connected to, because nobody actually uses it for phones anymore. So we've got a bunch of extras that we want to do, and that's why we've still got people in at the IETF. And we obviously, when you've got a standard like this, you need to develop a community, you've got to do some marketing, you've got to do some adoption. So writing the standard is only the first of many 90%. All right, so we know what a standard is and why we have them and the fact that they're really great. And we've talked about who oversees the process and how it works, but there's some challenges beyond building it. Was it worth it? I hope you appreciate my terrible pun, because my children don't. So it was great. When you're building a new standard and you want it to be globally compatible, we held our child up to the jungle and it got quite mauled. And that was okay, because what we ended up building was better than ever. And we found that everybody arguing with us on the internet was arguing in good faith. And what we built was something infinitely better than we could have done within our own little echo chamber. Everybody says, I don't have an accent, until you go to another country and you discover that, no, you really do have an accent. And that was the same with building this. You sit there and you don't realise your assumptions until you hold it up to a pool of people who've got a whole bunch of different expertise, different to you. You do need to enjoy arguing on the internet, and some people are really stubborn. So I mentioned how long it took us just to get the standard built. That was 3 years, but we had the idea back in 2014. So this has been a 5-year process for us just to get a standard published. We've got 2 primary people involved, but we've got a number of others doing the implementation, testing, writing developer libraries. So that's 4 people, and we think that we've probably spent $1 million in terms of sending people to conferences and doing all that sort of stuff. And that's a big opportunity cost as well. IETF does give you personal skills. Getting involved with it, they teach you how to do this common consensus. They teach you how to guide people into understanding whether their objection is a real objection or whether they're just being a pain in the arse. Were we happy with the result? Absolutely. I mean, what we've built is fantastic. We really do believe it's going to drive innovation in an area where, email is a fundamental communication tool. Who knows where it's going to be in 10 years, but at least at the moment, when everything else fails, you've always got email, and it is something that is very resilient to time zones in a way that real-time chat is never going to be. Would we do it again? Wouldn't do it for anything less. You have to know what it is that you're building and whether you think it'll be worth it, and we knew that it was the only way that we could compete with the big players, so for us, it was worth it. Hopefully you've learned something today. Did you learn something? Hum if you learned something today. Hey! All right, hum if you're scared or horrified about the process of building a standard. Oh, yep, good. All right, good. Hum if you're ready for the next panel discussion coming up. Well, nobody's ready. Oh, they are ready. Hey! Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Nicola.